Welcome to Yachting International Radio, where we dive deep into the stories, challenges, and experiences that shape our global yachting community. In today's episode, we're tackling an important and timely topic: discrimination in yachting, particularly surrounding nationality and the unique challenges faced by Russian crew members in the industry. Joining us is a seasoned yachting professional who brings firsthand insight into these issues. In this candid conversation, she shares her own experiences navigating job applications, cultural misunderstanding, and the impact of global politics on crew recruitment. We explore how biases and assumptions can shape workplace dynamics, why cross-cultural empathy is so important, and what hirees can do to create more inclusive onboard environments. Whether you're a recruiter, yacht owner, crew member, or simply passionate about building a more open and diverse industry, this episode offers invaluable perspectives and practical advice on bridging those cultural gaps. Let's get started. Today on Yachting International Radio, we're talking about discrimination in our industry. Obviously, it can come in various shapes and forms. We're talking about nationality, and I have a guest with us, and I will disclose her nationality if that's okay, given the topic that we're discussing. So she is Russian. I'm not going to disclose her name. I can tell you we did an interview many years ago, and I still refer to that interview today when speaking to clients, especially around leadership, because you shared something with me that was so powerful. And it's just understanding different cultures. And the one thing you told me was that in Western culture, they say please and thank you all the time. And in your culture, it's a little bit different, where you don't need, as in your words, say please and thank you every 2 minutes. So you were walking up to the aft deck and you were passing a deckhand, and he stepped aside to you and he didn't say anything. And he was like, thank you. And you're like, oh my gosh, like, why do I keep having to say thank you? So I remember that moment so clearly. And I, as I said, use it so frequently. Lead us to understand cross-cultural communication and empathy and the importance of communicating how we are different. But in today's episode, what we're talking about is being discriminated against because of your nationality being Russian, especially when applying for jobs. And obviously with the war, that hasn't made it any easier. And I believe that you have applied for jobs and they've outright said, we're not hiring Russians. Is that correct?
Correct. However, the employers or agents, they can't openly say that because that would be discrimination. So the agents that I know for a long time, they've just been kind to tell me that in many cases, when they even try to push a great candidate for the position, the employers or the management company would come back and say, I'm sorry, we currently cannot deal with that because there's certain issues come with hiring Russian crew. And this is what I wanted also to talk about. These days, because of what's happening in the political arena right now, a lot of people know that Russians struggle with the banking systems. We've been deprived of some of the banking systems. However, a lot of people found a way to receive the salary. They opened the banks in the international banks outside Russia, and that is not a problem for many people these days. So that is one misconception, this assumption about this. Is that people thinking, oh my gosh, it's going to be so difficult to get the payment through, and how are we going to pay this person, and so on. So if there's a great candidate on their desk, at least give the opportunity to people to explain what's going on with the salary receiving and so on. And another thing being affected with the recent situation is that Russians have to fly through many different countries, but not direct flights. Before, it took like 3 hours to get to Nice from Moscow. Now you have to fly to Turkey before you go to Nice. But that's like one more leg. And when people say, oh no, it's too expensive to pay for the flights for Russians, but on the other hand, it's much cheaper still to pay for South African or Australian crew to fly to Europe. If we are talking about Europe, for example. So in this case, I feel that in the industry, there's a lot of excuses rather not to hire Russian crew. And that comes with different other things. That Russian crew is assessed as a different culture and different ways of doing things. Or other fears that, let's say, linked to Russian nationality. or bias that also created by the recent situation in the world. And a lot of people who've been to Russia and worked with Russians know that these are only biases. And obviously, we have all different experiences, and I equally had amazing people from the same nationality, and I had worked with not so amazing people from the same nationality. So it's up to our personal outcome, like how the person actually is, like not generalizing the nation as such.
We're talking about generalization. What assumptions, besides the logistical assumptions that you've just shared, what are some of the assumptions that crew might make around Russian crew specifically about their character?
I think Russians come across as rude very often, and that's one of the examples that I gave you a long time ago. And I just entered the industry and obviously could speak English, so people can understand me, but I didn't have all the aware of all the mannerisms and all the situational types of communication that you have to use, the please and thank you. Right? For me, it was absolutely normal that a man gives way to a woman without asking for thank you. And that was this is how our men are brought up. And the same with me. Like, obviously, if you give a seat to an elderly woman in a bus, she would probably say thank you, but she doesn't have to. It would be absolutely normal thing to do, and you don't expect anything back. One of the cultural differences that I've noticed very, very heavily is that when you do something good to a person in the Western world, you would expect that person to say the word thank you or praise you or do something. In our culture, it is also expected, but it is not necessary because you are doing it without expecting anything.
Which is a beautiful thing.
I guess so. But again, this is just the way our language and our communication is structured. I don't think that people who expect thank you, they're not feeling like they don't have that beautiful feeling of giving. It's just that the structure of the communication is a bit different than what they're used to. It seems normal. And I had the same situation in the bar. When the Western man, that was the first thing in the crew. Somebody bought the drinks and you'd have to return the drinks by buying another round to people. And I didn't also know that because if you go in my culture, if you go in the bar and you buy your friends a round of drinks, obviously most of the time they would say thank you, but you're not expect them to buy you a round of food or a round of drinks in the future. That's just, it's finished. A credit of what you've created for yourself in the future by doing something. And I've been told, like, I've bought a round of drinks. Why didn't you buy a round of drinks? And especially coming from a man, that's pretty normal. When you go to a bar back at home and the guys buy you drinks, you don't feel obliged or you don't feel like you have to buy another round of drinks or him a drink. So that is something that considered rude from my side, but I was completely unaware of the situation.
And then you become unfairly judged. And we can just see in that example how misunderstanding can lead to tension and conflict if it's not openly discussed. And that can affect their assumption of you or those from your culture. And they might assume, based on your example, my God, they are greedy and rude. Russians. That's just how they are. And that's not the case from when you give that opportunity to explain your standpoint. It just makes perfect sense. And then you feel compassion and acceptance. So what differently on board, like you being in a leadership role, having done an advanced leadership course, naturally we work with crew from various nationalities. How can you close that cultural gap?
I think the most important thing, we create that every time. For example, I have a hiring process. I really try to diversify my team in terms of nationalities if possible. I've been hiring people who, as they said to me, they had a very little chance to be hired. People from African countries, and I'm not talking about South Africa. And they were absolutely brilliant. And what I've asked them, how long were you looking for a job? And some of them were looking for a job for 2 years. In the yachting industry. That was quite a few years back, but still, I was, wow, giving opportunity to people who, in my view, were struggling with maybe they were not the A-list candidate, you know? Let's say, for example, British crew who has absolutely amazing English skills and can communicate very clearly and so on. And we kind of, as this part of the world people, I mean Europeans, you know, understand the culture better, European or Western culture better, right? But we have to also think about if we came to this industry, and I personally came to this industry and stayed in it, not for the money as such, even though it's a great bonus to what we do for our hard work, but also to meet new people, new cultures, to learn, to broaden my horizon, to diversify my views on the world. And I know political conversations are not very welcome on board normally, especially now when it's such a difficult one around. But there are so many beautiful conversations happening between people from different cultures. And, you know, if you ask anyone, like, do you know anything about Africa or African countries and how they live and what they do? And what does their life look like? You would not know nothing. Or just assumptions, or that they, have this and this. That's just gonna be our perception of their culture. But when you meet a person like that and they describe their life, their childhood, how they played with their, with their friends and so on, you learn a lot. What TV shows they watched to describe the situation. I was sitting in the crew mess and one of the crew members said to me, "Hey, you know this TV show from childhood?" And I was like, "No." And they were like, what is wrong with you? This is like the TV show all over. This is the most amazing, famous TV show. And I said, well, hello, I grew up in Russia. And 28 years of my life before I joined the industry, I've spent in Russia watching Russian movies, Russian TV shows. And I obviously grew up in the Soviet Union that granted us beautiful Russian TV series. And I couldn't see it because we were at the time kind of closed country from everything else. But even now, I'm not a kid anymore. And I don't have kids myself, so I wouldn't be interested in watching it at this point. So I'm sorry. And that's also because I think it's a Commonwealth-dominated industry. And we were so trained to be accepting and blend into that culture so much that the people from different cultures, lose their opportunity to show our culture. Or there is no acceptance of getting that culture through or shine. The way people know this culture when they come and visit our countries. I'm not talking about Russia only, I'm talking about general. Because when I visited Africa, I've been only in Kenya and Tanzania myself, unfortunately. I was amazed. I was amazed how beautiful those countries are and how safe they are compared to what people were saying. Traveling alone, and gosh, there's a lot of stigmas around culture. I think the most important thing is to hire different nationalities. Don't build a boat made of British crew. Yes, it's going to be easier. Or like, don't make a Russian boat, don't make a South African boat, French boat, and so on. People work better when they become better individuals, are more mindful around the environment and other cultures, and respectful towards others. And that's how they get there. They need to be exposed to the cultures, different people, different ways of communication.
100%. And on that note of hiring, you've obviously learned a lot about the importance of hiring the soft skills as well as hard skills. And I don't think our industry focuses on that enough. So what would you like to advise, share with recruiters, yacht management, head of departments, and captains when it comes to hiring? Because it goes a lot deeper than what you look like, what your nationality is, and your hard skills. Hard skills are very teachable, most of them. But when it comes to soft skills, what would you say are important characteristics, traits that one should have or look for when hiring?
I think for some reason, recently it's became unimportant to ask people what they actually do in life other than yachting. How they socialize, what are their interests, what they would like to achieve in the future, even after yachting. Ask them behavioral questions, like behavioral-based questions of how they would react or how they would show themselves in certain situations. I know it's a little bit more psychology involved, but it's, I think, very important to hear out how people perceive their behavior and to learn more about the personalities and the way how they interact with others and how open they are to meet those international environments. Because to be honest, every person I've interviewed, they all want to meet new people. Not new people from their culture, want just meet new people, period. I think that is something we can ask recruiters. And also, giving chance to people, it's like you don't have to hire them, you don't have to push them to the employers, but at least you can I know they're very busy and there's a lot of people in the industry, but still giving a chance and have an interview with a person. Maybe you also looking at the CV, they might think, oh, it might be really bad English, or, that person might have master's degree in English language in the past,
So being a head of department, what character traits or soft skills would you consider to be important when, let's say, hiring a second stewardess?
To be honest, recently I look for kindness in people because that is what we're deprived of. And in this industry, a lot of times we have a lot of stressful situations and long hours and quite challenging environment. And I think a little kindness wouldn't hurt anyone,
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and sharing some insight into your nationality. I know it's helpful for me to know, and I'm sure for other people to know. So thank you so much.